Hello, hello. So today we are going to talk about busting out those push-ups to be a push-up rock star. I'll give people just another second or two-ish to tune in, and Ryan will let them in. If you guys do have a question, comment, or concern, please keep yourself on mute just to make it easier to watch back through everything and hear everything. If you do have a question, you can comment in chat. At the end, I will open it up to a few questions so that you can ask them as well if you're going to forget it, because I know I might forget sometimes. So I like to comment it in chat just so I remember. Anyway, so talking about building towards those, beast mode full push-ups, okay? So a lot of times we will push you to use the incline over using knee push-ups. Why is that? Okay. So when you think about the push-up and you think about any movement for that matter, you want to think about creating that neuromuscular efficiency. When you're able to recruit muscles to the correct extent, most efficiently, you're going to be strongest. Okay. If we do things to apply more pressure to muscles, we're not going to be as strong in the movement pattern. So sometimes that can be done strategically. Like when you do planks, you'll actually sometimes want to set up a little bit longer to create more tension in an advanced move, or even then slightly rock forward in that when we get the rocking planks, right? But all those things are actually making the movement less efficient to add stress or strain in a good way, okay? So you have to do it strategically. You don't want to just do it and not be conscious. But if you're actually going for the hardest, most functionally efficient hold, you want to drive back through your heels when you're holding that plank position. So when we're talking about the push-up, the reason we're going to push you to do it off the incline is because of how important that ability to drive back through your heels and create that tension through your legs really is. When we go down to our knees, we're not having to learn how to engage our quads, flex our glutes, do all of that in the same way, okay? So the simple fact of the matter is when we do the incline, that can really help us learn how to engage everything correctly from our head to our heels. It's going to translate much more efficiently into that full movement pattern. It might be why you feel like, hey, I've gotten a lot stronger at my knee push-ups, but it's not translating, okay? That being said, I know sometimes there just is no other option, right? We can use the knee push-ups even to modify if the incline's too low for an extended amount of reps, but we wanna know why there's limitations or upsides or downsides to specific movements, okay? So that being said, if you don't have a bench, you could maybe find a different dip bar, counter. You can put a barbell in your squat rack. You can use a Smith machine. You can even start off the wall, okay? It might seem silly. You might feel a little weird doing it, but even starting off the wall can be a great way to use that incline. We have to regress to progress, guys, okay? And I'm especially a big believer in this with push-ups because I think so often we think we can do it, right? I can do a push-up from the ground. And then we see all these guys, right? All these different weird things that aren't true full movements. We're not getting the true benefit, okay? Because we have to remember that what we actually feel working during a movement is what's actually giving the benefit. And I say this as a person who's extremely guilty of compensating during their push-ups, thinking, yeah, I'm beast mode, I'm busting out all these push-ups from the ground. And then I was like, watching one of my videos, I was like, whoa, that's not good. I'm gonna coach people on this. I have to do it correctly. It made me take that step back. It made it a lot harder to start, but then it made me way more efficient at it, okay? So you have to realize that sometimes doing it correctly is going to make it harder, so you have to modify a little bit to build up, okay? So when we're thinking about this push-up, whether or not you're doing it off an incline, off the ground, I wanna go over some key setup stuff, okay? First things first, spread those fingers on the ground. Don't do one of these guys, okay? If you think about this, just like your feet are your foundation, your squats and your deadlift, your hands are your foundation in your push-ups, okay? You spread those fingers with the middle finger pointing straight ahead in line, okay? When you start to do these things are compensations, okay, that create overload. Sometimes we will have you very slightly turn your hands out just because you need that for your shoulder mobility. But again, it is a compensation that does change how you engage things. It's a cheat, okay? This one is not bueno. No matter what, do not do this. Do not turn your hands in, okay? So middle finger's pointing straight ahead. In terms of the exact width, because I get asked about this a lot, there is no one set width, okay? There are advantages and disadvantages to each. The more narrow, the more challenging you might find it, but the less scapular control and movement that's actually required. It's why if you've had a shoulder injury in the past, someone might be like, oh, do narrow grip, it's safer, okay? No, it requires less scapular control. So yes, it's safer in that way, but if you never learn that scapular control, you're never gonna progress. You're gonna be limiting yourself at other things. You might even perpetuate the overload and injury in other movements, okay? So yes, it's a safe way to build back, but you wanna learn the other movements. So Standard is outside your chest. Wide is a little bit wider. That can be sometimes easier for some. It can be a little bit more pec engagement, okay? So narrow grip is even gonna be a little more tricep, but it's gonna require less scapular control than a wider grip. So you can play around with grip. We even do play around with grip. I use it strategically to target and activate muscles to different extents, okay? But think about really pushing into the ground as you're doing it with your fingers pointing straight ahead. Create that tension. When you create that tension, yes, it can fatigue muscles, guys, but it activates better. Just like when you grab the bar for a pull-up, when you create that tension into the ground to push the ground away in deadlift, it creates that activation of those muscles, okay? So as you set up, think about really pushing that ground away. Think about gripping the ground with all of your fingers. If you start to rock out, you're gonna start to overload things. You're not gonna move things in the correct way, okay? Then as you set your feet back, you wanna think drive through your heels, flex your quads, brace your abs. Even do a slight posterior pelvic tilt to engage the abs as you hold. Okay, that you don't want to round up or start to get that thoracic rounding, but you want to think this nice position. Okay, as you have this tension, run through all those things. Even think, can I pull my shoulder blades just slightly down because I'm not shrugging, right? Slightly down. As you lower down, okay, you want to think that nice straight line, that nice positioning. You want to think about the shoulder blades even drawing together as you lower. You're still driving back through your heels, creating the tension through your quads. And then you're pushing the ground away to come back up, okay? And the reason it's so key, we like actually cue pushing the ground away is you're not just pressing back up, you're pushing that ground away as you're bracing everything. But that setup is key. Pulling the shoulders slightly down, okay? Gripping the ground with your hands, driving back through your heels to create that tension. Because that way at the bottom, you're not gonna shift forward, right? You're driving back. You flex those quads, you brace those abs. And the reason I mentioned the importance of the scapular movement, so think about your shoulder blades actually drawing towards your spine as you lower down, is that will help keep your shoulders healthy and safe, okay? If we don't have proper scapular movement, we're gonna end up with neck and shoulder pain, okay? So if you can't control those shoulder blades, if you can't feel those things working, that's where the incline even needs to come into play, okay? As you push that ground away, you should actually feel your shoulder blades spread apart, okay? We think about our shoulder blades a lot when we do back exercises, but they're just as important for pressing. When you set up for the bench, you want to think about engaging those shoulder blades. You want to think about engaging those lats because it will create a more powerful press. Because guys, our lats even have an impact on our upper arm, right? That round and shoulder posture. So we want to think about opening everything up, which means actually getting those things engaged correctly. It helps prevent shrugging as well, so we're not overusing our upper traps. We don't create that rotator cuff strain or injury, okay? So think about those things as you go through the setup. So just to go through that again, hands gripping the ground outside the chest, okay? When you set up, think about driving back through your heels, flexing your quads, squeezing your glutes, bracing your abs, even getting ready for a punch, the slight tuck under. Think about pulling the shoulders down so you're not shrugging, okay? So right now you're pressing the ground away. Keep that tension as you slowly lower down, okay? Think about the shoulder blades drawing together because that will also prevent your elbows from flaring out. And then you're gonna press the ground away to come back up, driving back through your heels the entire time. When we think about the hand positioning, what we don't want is this, right? When our elbows flare up, look what automatically happens, the shoulders come up, okay? That also doesn't allow for proper scapular movement. So by focusing on that scapular movement, we actually prevent that from happening. We engage the serratus anterior, which also helps with that nice arrow shape with our upper body, okay? Off an incline, you are doing and thinking the same things, okay? Here, you're just thinking press the bench away, okay? Drive back through the heels. When you do the incline, even think about lowering down so that it's either right at the bottom, like bra strap height, or even right at nipple height, okay? You don't want it further forward, you don't want it further back because that's gonna create a lot more strain. It's gonna actually lead to rounding forward. So here, okay, driving back through the heels, lowering down, pushing the bench away again, always thinking drive back through the heels. That creates that efficiency of movement, right? So going back to that plank position, when you drive back through your heels, you are loading everything and sort of dispersing the tension, okay? Versus creating all that overload on your upper body. Raising the incline up makes it a little easier. Lowering down makes it harder, okay? As you're building up, you're gonna have a rep range given, okay? When you are trying to learn to advance a movement, it is better for you to do 6 off a lower incline than 10 off a higher. I would even like you to use rest pause technique, and we can discuss this with you, but rest pause technique where maybe, maybe this is too hard for all 6. So you do 3, have to pause, and you do 3 more. You count for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and you go back to it. Or maybe you have 6 reps and you try the first one off the ground and you go, woohoo! Uh-oh. Okay, just set back up. You still control the eccentric, which can be very valuable. Then you go up to this incline, but you've sort of got to test it up where you actually try and do a harder variation, even if it's just for 1 rep before modifying. But if you just keep adding reps and trying to do more reps at the modified variation, you're just going to get better at building the strength endurance in that thing. So sometimes it's better to be like, I can only do 2. Great, do 2 of a harder variation, okay? And use that rest pause technique to even pause and then do a couple more to finish out those reps. And you can even message us and we'll talk a little bit about like all the techniques that you can specifically use. But you want to think about that, okay? In terms of the foot placement, I do want to sort of talk about that because I mentioned the hand placement. You can play around with it to activate different muscles. If we give you a specific one, use that specific one. There is a purpose. You can ask why, but use it. In terms of the foot positioning, okay? So not to sort of turn my back to you, but you can widen your feet out. You can put it more narrow. One is not right or wrong, okay? They are different. Putting them together allows you to engage your adductors, but it makes it a little bit harder because you don't have as much of a base of support. Widening them out can be very helpful, especially if you do have any sort of push-up variation that has that anti-rotational core benefit. So even use that as you're advancing different movements. You might find off the incline to slightly make it a little bit harder. You put your feet together, but then when you come down the ground, you're like, okay, I can't quite do that. Widening out my feet gives me that base of support so I can do it, okay? Then we can play around with tempos too. We might ask you to slow down the eccentric, right? Because we are actually stronger in that eccentric portion or that lowering down portion of the push-up. Sometimes we can even use a lower incline. So again, you might find, hey, okay, I can actually control this really nice and pretty, but I get down here and I'm like, uh-oh. Okay, so maybe you do go to the knees, right? Maybe you do eccentric here, okay? And again, you go really slow all the way down. Then you have to go down to your knees to press back up. We can do different modifications like that because a lot of times we are stronger in that eccentric portion. So we can actually use that to our advantage. We might give you a harder variation. You're like, I think I can do that. Give it a try. You might be surprised. Okay. But again, it goes down to what do you feel working as you do this? You want to focus on that mind-body connection. And then if you do feel things breaking down, guys, don't just keep pushing through, modify. Okay. We can't have ego in it because we have to remember that how we practice these things is the recruitment pattern that gets ingrained. Okay. So as tempting as it is to be like, well, I can almost do it. The second you feel that form faltering, do not be afraid to modify. Okay. Maybe it's only even putting your hands up on like little yoga blocks, right? Don't be afraid to modify it, to even take that 10, 15-second rest and then go back to it. Okay. The last thing I wanted to go over was with all of this, okay, if we're helping you build towards push-ups and we give you anti-rotational, band chest press. I don't know why people have this thing with resistance bands, but they do. I don't have one because I didn't think to bring it over. But if you had a band, go whoop. My beautiful assistant is throwing me a band. Thank you, Brian. I one time called my beautiful assistant on live, and I was so amused by it. I've used it clearly multiple times after. But if we have you do this, right, you can even bring it under if you don't like the rubbing. We might have you do an anti-rotational band chest press, okay? This is helping you learn how to brace and stabilize so that you don't have rotation, which even though you have that solid foundation, both hands are down, it's really key. You have that core control to be able to brace, right? So that anti-rotational benefit, but we might have you use the resistance band because of the way it creates tension where the muscle is actually strongest. It can really be applicable to the push-up, okay? That standing press can be really applicable because when we do the bench press, we don't have that same core engagement. So you might see band presses. Resistance band is not easier than weights, okay? It's a different tension and it's amazing tension for this, okay? We might give you moves that have anti-rotational core benefit, like the shoulder taps, okay? Again, feet might be wider, you're tapping your shoulder, okay? Don't rush through these. Focus on not rotating because this is your perfect chance to focus on engaging those muscles and keeping tension as you're doing work, because the push-up is basically a moving plank, okay? So just think about all this. If there's some moves in there, you're like, man, I don't like this move. Why are you having me do it? Ask, because it might be very, very applicable to why we're having you, or how we're having you work on your push-ups, okay? I'm gonna make sure I didn't forget anything, okay? So I started with going over the incline, why I like that over the knees, then also going through the setup. Remember, you're gripping the ground, you're spreading your fingers, you're engaging your back, you're focusing on that scapular movement, driving back through the heels, okay? You want to play around with the hand and foot placement. Remember, the foot placement can help give you a wider base of support. The hand placement can be adjusted to change how we're activating different muscles. If you have a shoulder injury, so we might go with a narrower grip. But just because it is safer doesn't mean it's better. It just means that it doesn't require as much scapular control, which we ultimately want to have you build back to because it'll help improve your rowing, your pull-ups, all that jazz, even prevent neck and shoulder pain in everyday life. Because no offense, but in everyday life, we can't be like, wait, I've got to only have this hand positioning as you're reaching for stuff, especially kids and other moving objects, okay? Then be willing to regress. So I'm saying this to you because it's so tempting once we've gotten to something to not want to go backwards. And I can tell you, it was the most beneficial thing I've ever done to go back when I thought I was really good at push-ups, because I wasn't, and there was more I could learn. Now there's always more I can learn. But if you feel like your form is faltering, film it, A, because we can help give you some tips, but B, do not be afraid to modify even as you fatigue. Sometimes that means going off an incline. Sometimes that means doing the rest pause technique. So being like, okay, I can do 2 of the harder variations and I have 6 reps I'm going to do. So I'm going to try and actually pause for 15 seconds and then go back to it. The reason for the short pauses is because your body does not have that time to fully like replenish basically and be fully rested. So you're sort of almost building that strength endurance by tricking your body into thinking it's doing all the reps in a row. Okay, so that can be very, very helpful. And then as you're progressing, don't get caught up in 6 to 10 reps, trying to always do 10 reps. It might be better to do 4 of a harder variation and then even have to modify for 2 than trying to just add reps, add a modified variation, because then we're just making ourselves better at the modified variation. Okay. And then remember, there's going to be some moves that don't always feel super hard, or that we think, you know, why is this in here? And a lot of times it has application to building up those lifts that we actually want to improve. I'm going to go try and look at any questions, comments, or concerns that anybody's commented in chat. Try not to pull anything over. Okay. Is it important to touch my chest to the ground every time? If I can only get to the 4 inches from the floor, should I immediately modify even though my form is perfect? You want to strengthen through the full range of motion. So I would tell you, if it's 4 inches and it's the last couple reps, maybe you stop, but maybe you go all the way to the floor and just do the eccentric only. Because the thing is if you stop there, you're only strengthening through that range of motion. So ideally, you always strengthen through the fullest range of motion. I personally would probably stop and modify, or even just give myself that 10 to 15 seconds rest and then try and do it, risking failing at the bottom. Because again, 4 inches is still a lot, and it's still something that you're not strengthening through the full range of motion. And a lot of times too, it doesn't require that last little bit of scapular control to push the ground away. So I would say probably modify. That would be my ideal. Obviously, if there's no way to modify because you don't have an appropriate incline and you rest and you're like, crud, still can't do it, then maybe you get away with it for that time. Well, either I scared everybody else off, or there are just so many good tips. Corn cob push-ups seem impossible for some reason, even at a higher incline. Should I increase the incline or just do regular push-ups? I must just want to be really flippant and tell you, Julie, just because I know you so well, to be like, what do you think the answer is to that one? Please, you modify, you got to learn how to do it. You can't just avoid the things you don't like. What I can tell you that you might be doing, and I'll give you this cue. So corn cob push-ups, for those who haven't done them before, they're so much fun. They're like eating a corn cob. You go down center, you go to one side, other side, center, up, okay? So what you're probably doing is losing tension on your hands on the ground or on the incline, okay? Because what happens is when we go to one side, we rock out, right? We lose tension because you're still wanting to think that your weight is centered, okay? It's just like anti-rotational core work. Your weight is still centered, even though it's off center. So when you do this off the incline and you lower down, think that tension here, then the tension doesn't really change in a weird way, even though you're loading that arm a little bit more and then the other arm a little bit more, okay? So you're still creating that tension. So just think, not this, right? Because sometimes people will go to the side and they rock up, right? But you want to actually think, I'm still pressing as much through my thumb as I was when I'm here, okay? Tension is really not any different. It's just a little bit more load on one arm. Pay attention to that next time. I think you'll be really surprised. That was the corn cob push-up. Can you use hand grip support things to protect wrists? Okay, so I'm going to do a very quick little thing on this. I have a better video on it, much more extended. The reason our wrists hurt during push-ups is generally, I know they feel weak, but it's generally not because they're weak. It's because we actually lack wrist extension because we spend so much time with our wrist inflection, okay? So if your wrist hurt with push-ups, all the mobility work we have you do not skip it. It is fabulous. But yes, you can do knuckles. You could put your hands on push-up stands. You could use kettlebells. You could use dumbbells. One of the things I really like to do, I don't know if I have something really quick to show it, but man, this will kind of work. This is not ideal. You would want actually like a towel or the shirt off Ryan's back. Thank you. But you actually want something that you can create just a little extra thing underneath your heels or the heel of your hands, okay? Because what that does is if you think about it on the ground, right? Full wrist extension, even just a little bit underneath the heel of your palm, doesn't require as much extension, okay? So that's a great way to build up as you're doing all that mobility work. So you could roll up a yoga mat. I have a great video all on the wrist extension stuff, but that would be what I would recommend. Thank you for the shirt. But ideally, you don't want to be protecting it. I know we do have different aches and pains, guys, and I know there are some specific health concerns and different things like that that require us to make modifications and work around. At the same time, my goal with everything I do with all of my clients is always to help you build back and improve as much as possible. So even though you might have, different issues that require you to always use some sort of support, I want to make it so that you could do a few push-ups without it. Or instead of always having to be in the neutral grip, you can do some with just the heel of your hand up on the yoga mat. So we always want to do what we can to work on that wrist extension and work on the ability to actually engage. And going back to that first cue that I mentioned, a lot of times the reason our wrists hurt a lot and then our elbows are even suffering is because we're rocking out on our hands, because we are not actually focused on, is my thumb gripping the ground as much as every other finger, okay? So really think about that hand placement, spreading those fingers wide to create that base of support, and you'll be surprised by how much that prevents some of the overload of the different areas, outside your wrist, your elbow, all that stuff. Well, I'm glad all those tips help, guys. I will post the replay so that you can actually watch back through this, pause it as needed, put on closed captioning, slow it down so that don't talk as fast. Yes, and some same wrist issues with downward dog sometimes, but sometimes it can be a little bit better because people can push back through the heel of the palm. That I would argue a lot of times is actually the tension that they're creating where they're placing the weight of their hands, because it requires actually a little less wrist extension than the push-up does. But still, again, focusing on that tension in the ground. Lots of helpful stuff in here, if I do say so myself. Watch back through this. Think about these cues as you go through. Guys, take time when you're doing the movements. I know it's really tempting when we want to get the 8 to 12 reps. We want to go to the next interval of work. We want to get our heart rate up. We want to do all these different things to rush through. But it's a lot of times better to make the workouts a little bit more disjointed, especially the first time through, and really focus on what we feel working. Take time to film, okay? Film those push-ups. It will help you really get a clear idea of what's going on, allow us to even give you cueing. But watch back through this and hopefully use these really key tips. Okay, last couple questions. Been doing the wrist routine, old injury. It will slowly get better. And again, everything improves to different extents. Will push-ups exacerbate tendonitis? It really depends on the area of tendonitis. And ideally, no. If you learn how to control a movement pattern, it's the best way to prevent overload and injury. But again, guys, sometimes it means doing wall push-ups to start so you can actually work on that scapular movement, okay? So no, it should not. Not every move is right for every person, but too often we just demonize one versus learning how to control the movement pattern to actually prevent overload, okay? And it might mean starting off the wall. Gripping the ground really helps. I don't have the pinching in my wrist now. Yeah, happy dance. All right. If you guys have any questions or comments or concerns, please reach out. Even after reviewing this, we'd be happy to explain it, happy to break down stuff, happy to watch your videos. Use the videos. That's what we're here for, to help you really learn more about your movement patterns. All right. Have a fabulous, it's Monday. Have a fabulous Monday, guys, and a great rest of your week.